A widow should be grieving, not smiling. My mother-in-law ripped my husband's photograph off the wall while I stood there frozen, and then she told me I would wear black for the rest of my life or I wasn't welcome in this family anymore. But that night, alone in our bedroom, I found a letter hidden in the pocket of his old leather jacket, and the first line made me collapse to the floor. If you're reading this, my love, don't let them win. Before I tell you what else that letter said, and how it completely changed my understanding of the man I married, take a moment to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. This story might just change how you see grief, love, and the courage it takes to live again. My name is Caroline Bennett. I'm 36 years old, and 18 months ago, I buried the love of my life. My husband Thomas, Tommy, as everyone called him, was the kind of man who lit up every room he walked into. He had this laugh, loud and contagious, that could make strangers smile from across a restaurant. He was a firefighter in our small town of Maplewood, Oregon, and he treated that job like a sacred calling. "We save lives, Caro," he'd say whenever I worried about the danger.
"That's not a job.
That's a purpose." We met at a 4th of July barbecue when I was 24. I'd burned my hand on a sparkler. Yes, a sparkler, like a child, and Tommy appeared out of nowhere with a first aid kit and a grin that made my heart skip. "Let me guess," he'd said, wrapping my fingers gently in gauze. "You were trying to write your name in the air."
I'd laughed.
"How did you know?" "Because that's exactly what I was doing when I burned myself at 12. He winked. "Some of us just never grow up." We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony by the lake. His parents, Gerald and Maureen Bennett, sat in the front row. Even then, I noticed something cold in Maureen's eyes when she looked at me. But Tommy squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't worry about them. They'll warm up." They never did. Gerald and Maureen Bennett were old money, or at least they acted like it. Gerald had been a bank executive before retiring, and Maureen had never worked a day in her life. They lived in a sprawling Victorian house on the nicest street in town, hosted garden parties with the mayor, and believed that appearances were everything. Tommy was their only son, and they had plans for him. Big plans. He was supposed to take over the family's investment business, marry a girl from the country club, and carry on the Bennett legacy. Instead, he became a firefighter and married me, a public school art teacher with student loans and a second-hand car. To Gerald and Maureen, I was a disappointment before I ever opened my mouth. For 12 years, I tried to earn their approval. I hosted holiday dinners, remembered every birthday, sent flowers on their anniversary. I bit my tongue when Maureen made comments about my little teaching job or asked when I was finally going to give Thomas a proper heir. I smiled through every passive-aggressive remark, every backhanded compliment, every cold silence. Tommy always defended me, but it exhausted him. "They're stuck in their ways, Caro," he'd say after particularly brutal visits. "Just ignore them. You're my family now." And I was. For 12 beautiful years, we built a life together. We bought a little craftsman house with a wraparound porch. We adopted a golden retriever named Biscuit. We talked about having children someday when the time was right. We laughed constantly over breakfast during late-night movies, in the garden while I painted, and he read aloud from whatever book he was devouring that week. Tommy made everything feel safe. He made everything feel possible. And then, on a cold November morning, I got the call that shattered my entire world. There had been a fire at an apartment complex downtown. A beam collapsed. Tommy was inside, helping evacuate a family on the 3rd floor. He got them out. He didn't make it. The funeral was the largest Maplewood had ever seen. Firefighters came from 3 states to honor him. The mayor spoke. His crew carried his casket draped in an American flag. I sat in the front row, numb, unable to feel anything except the absence of his hand in mine. Gerald and Maureen sat beside me, but they didn't touch me. They didn't comfort me. Maureen cried delicately into a handkerchief, but when I broke down sobbing during the eulogy, she leaned over and whispered, "Compose yourself, Caroline. People are watching." I should have known then what was coming. For the first 3 months, I barely left the house. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I wore Tommy's old flannel shirts and held his pillow against my chest, trying to catch the last traces of his scent. Biscuit stayed glued to my side, whimpering when I cried, which was often. My friends checked on me. My coworkers sent meals. My sister flew in from Boston and stayed for 2 weeks, forcing me to shower and eat toast. Slowly, so slowly, I started to feel human again. By month 6, I could get through most days without crying. By month 12, I returned to teaching part-time. By month 15, I started painting again. Nothing big, just small watercolors of the garden Tommy and I had planted together. Sunflowers. Lavender. The little stone bench where we used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. One afternoon, I painted a picture of Tommy and me dancing at our wedding. When I finished, I laughed out loud, really laughed, because I remembered how he'd stepped on my feet 3 times during our first dance and apologized so dramatically that the whole reception had applauded. It felt good to laugh. It felt like maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. That's when the Bennetts came back into my life. They showed up unannounced on a Saturday afternoon, exactly 18 months after the funeral. I was in the living room, hanging a new painting, a portrait of Tommy smiling, based on my favorite photograph of him, when the doorbell rang. Maureen swept in first, Gerald trailing behind. She wore all black, as she had every time I'd seen her since the funeral. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in the colorful throw pillows on the couch, the vase of fresh tulips on the coffee table, the soft music playing from the speaker. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Caroline," she said, her voice flat. "We need to talk." I set down my paintbrush. "Of course. Can I get you some tea? Coffee?" "This isn't a social visit." Maureen walked slowly around the room, examining everything like a detective at a crime scene. She stopped in front of the painting I'd just hung. Tommy's smiling face looked down at us. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a portrait of Tommy. I painted it from. I can see what it is." She turned to face me. "What I want to know is why you're smiling. Why there are flowers on your table. Why you're wearing—" She gestured at my yellow sundress with disgust. "That." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" Gerald cleared his throat. "What Maureen is trying to say is that we've noticed some concerning behavior from you lately." "Concerning?" Maureen's eyes narrowed. "We drove by last Tuesday. We saw you laughing on the porch with some woman. That was my sister. She was visiting from. A widow should be grieving." Maureen cut me off. "A widow should be in mourning. She should not be laughing on porches, wearing bright colors, or—" She pointed at the painting of Tommy. "Hanging pictures like everything is perfectly fine." My heart started pounding. "Maureen, it's been 18 months. I loved Tommy with everything I had. I still love him. But I'm trying to— Trying to what? Move on." She spat the words like venom. "Our son is dead, Caroline."
Dead.
"And you're acting like it's just another Tuesday." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I forced them back. "That's not fair. I'm not moving on. I'm learning to live again. There's a difference." Maureen laughed coldly. "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already forgotten him." She walked to the wall where our wedding photo hung, the one of Tommy and me cutting the cake, both of us grinning like fools. Before I could stop her, she lifted it off the hook. "What are you doing?" I gasped. "This belongs with family," she said. "Real family. People who understand what it means to honor the dead." "That's my photograph. That's my wedding." Gerald stepped forward. "Caroline, perhaps it's best if you let us take a few of Thomas's things. Clearly, you're not in a state to properly. Get out." The words came from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I didn't recognize. "Both of you. Get out of my house." Maureen's face twisted. "Your house? This house was bought with Bennett money. Thomas supported you for 12 years while you played with your little paints. Don't you dare." I said get out. Gerald grabbed Maureen's arm. "Let's go." Clearly she needs more time to understand what we're asking. Maureen set the wedding photo down on the coffee table, not back on the wall, and smoothed her black dress. "We'll be in touch, Caroline. And I suggest you think carefully about what kind of widow you want to be. Because, right now—" She looked me up and down with pure contempt. "You're a disgrace to our son's memory. They left without another word. I stood in the middle of my living room, shaking. Biscuit pressed against my legs, whimpering. I picked up the wedding photo and held it against my chest, tears finally streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, Tommy," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying Maureen's words over and over. "A widow should be grieving. You're a disgrace to our son's memory." By 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and went to the closet where I still kept some of Tommy's things. His leather jacket hung in the back, the one he'd worn on our first date, the one that still smelled faintly of him. I pulled it off the hanger and pressed it to my face, breathing in the memory of him. As I held it, I felt something crinkle in the inside pocket. I reached in and pulled out a folded envelope. It was old, the paper slightly yellowed, and my name was written on the front in Tommy's handwriting.
Caroline.
To be opened when you need it most. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 3 pages long, written in Tommy's familiar messy scrawl. I sank to the closet floor and began to read. "My dearest Caro, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me.
I'm sorry.
I'm so deeply sorry. I know this job was always a risk, and I know you worried every time I walked out the door. But I want you to know that every moment I spent loving you was worth any danger I faced. I'm writing this letter because I know my family. I know my parents. And I know that if I'm gone, they will try to control you the way they always tried to control me. If you're reading this, don't let them win. Caro, my parents never understood me. They wanted me to be someone I wasn't, a banker, a businessman, a proper Bennett.
But you?
You saw me.
The real me.
The man who wanted to save lives, who loved terrible puns, who cried during dog movies and wasn't ashamed of it. You gave me permission to be myself. That was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. And now I need to give you something in return, the truth. My parents are not who they appear to be. The Bennett fortune they're so proud of, it's gone. Dad made some bad investments years ago and lost almost everything. They've been living off a trust my grandmother set up, a trust that was supposed to come to me when I turned 40. I turned 40 last year, Caro. And I took that money and did something my parents will never forgive me for. I put it all in your name. The house you're living in? It's yours. Free and clear. The savings account my parents think is theirs? It's actually in a trust for you. And the life insurance policy from the fire department, the one my parents have probably already tried to claim, it goes to you and only you. I did this because I know them. I know they would try to take everything from you the moment I was gone. They never saw your worth, Caro, but I always did. There's a safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box 247. The key is taped to the back of our wedding photo, the one hanging in the living room. Inside the box, you'll find all the documents, the deed to the house, the trust papers, a copy of my will, and letters from my lawyer confirming everything. My parents don't know about any of this. They think they're still in control. They're not. And here's the most important part, my love.
Live.
Don't you dare spend the rest of your life in black, mourning me like some Victorian ghost. Don't let my mother tell you how to grieve. Don't let my father make you feel small. You are brilliant and beautiful and so full of life, and that's exactly why I fell in love with you. I want you to laugh. I want you to paint. I want you to dance in the kitchen to terrible 80s music, the way we used to. And someday, when you're ready, I want you to love again. That's not betrayal, Caro. That's honoring everything we had. Because what we had was a love that made life worth living, and I refuse to let my death turn you into someone who's afraid to live. If my parents come for you, and they will, show them this letter. Show them the documents. And then show them the door. You don't owe them anything. You never did. Thank you for 12 perfect years. Thank you for loving a stubborn firefighter who couldn't dance and burn toast every single morning. Thank you for being my home. I'll love you forever, Caro. Even from wherever I end up next. Now go live. That's not a request. It's my dying wish. All my love, always. Tommy. P.S. Give Biscuit an extra treat for me. And tell him I'm sorry I won't be there to sneak him bacon anymore. He'll understand. I don't know how long I sat on that closet floor. Minutes.
Hours.
The sun was starting to rise by the time I finally stopped crying. But these weren't tears of grief, not entirely. They were tears of love, tears of gratitude, tears of absolute wonder at the man I had married. Tommy knew. He knew his parents would come for me. He knew they would try to diminish me, control me, take everything he'd left behind. And he'd spent what must have been months, maybe years, quietly protecting me from beyond the grave. I looked at the letter again, at his messy handwriting, at the little smiley face he'd drawn next to Biscuit's name. And for the first time since he died, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt fierce. The next morning, I went to the wedding photo still sitting on my coffee table. I turned it over and carefully peeled back the cardboard backing. There, taped exactly where Tommy said it would be, was a small brass key. I drove to First National Bank and asked to access safe deposit box 247. The clerk led me to a private room, where I used the key to open a long metal box filled with documents. Everything was there. The deed to the house, transferred entirely into my name. Trust documents showing an account worth over $800,000, money from Tommy's grandmother that he had legally redirected years ago. His updated will, notarized and witnessed, leaving everything to me. A life insurance policy worth $1.2 million, with me as the sole beneficiary. And a letter from his lawyer, confirming that all of this was legally airtight and that Gerald and Maureen Bennett had no claim to any of it. At the bottom of the box was one more thing, a small velvet pouch. Inside was a ring, an antique sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. A note was attached in Tommy's writing. This was my grandmother's. She wanted you to have it. Mom tried to take it after Grandma died, but I hid it. It's yours now, Caro. Wear it and remember, you are always the daughter she wished she'd had. I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly. 2 weeks later, Gerald and Maureen Bennett returned to my house. This time, they brought a lawyer. Caroline, Gerald said stiffly as they sat in my living room, we've decided to be generous. We're willing to let you stay in this house for 6 more months while you find alternative arrangements. In exchange, you'll sign over Thomas's life insurance and any claim to the family trust. The lawyer slid a stack of papers across the coffee table. This is a standard agreement. Very straightforward. I looked at the papers. I looked at Maureen, who was smiling smugly. I looked at Gerald, who wouldn't meet my eyes. And then I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh or a mocking laugh. It was a genuine, full-bodied laugh, the kind Tommy used to love. Maureen's smile vanished. What's so funny? I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder of my own. You know, Maureen, you were right about one thing. I did need to think carefully about what kind of widow I want to be. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. The deed, the trust papers, the will, the life insurance policy, the letter from Tommy's lawyer. I want to be the kind of widow who honors her husband's wishes, I said calmly. And Tommy's wish was very clear. Everything goes to me. The house, the savings, the insurance, the trust from his grandmother. All of it. Legally. Irrevocably. He changed the documents years ago. Gerald's face went pale. Maureen snatched up the papers, scanning them frantically. This can't be right, she sputtered. This is fraud. This is. It's completely legal, I said. Your lawyer is welcome to verify. Tommy knew exactly what he was doing. He knew you would try to take everything from me, and he made sure you couldn't. Maureen looked up, her eyes filled with fury. You manipulated him. You poisoned him against his own family.
No.
I held up Tommy's letter, the one I'd found in his jacket. These are his words, Maureen. Not mine. Would you like to read them? I watched her eyes scan the first few lines. Her face crumpled. He knew who you were, I said softly. He loved you because you were his parents. But he knew. And he chose to protect me anyway. Gerald stood abruptly. We're leaving. This isn't over. Yes, it is. I stood too, and for the first time in 18 months, I felt tall. Tommy asked me to show you the documents and then show you the door. So here's the door. Please don't come back unless you're ready to treat me with respect. Maureen rose slowly, clutching her purse like a lifeline. She looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before: defeat. He was our son, she whispered. He was my husband, I replied. And he wanted me to live. That's what I'm going to do. They left without another word. Their lawyer followed, looking deeply embarrassed. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Biscuit trotted over and pressed his nose against my hand. We did it, boy, I whispered. We actually did it. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've returned to teaching full-time. I've started selling my paintings at a local gallery. Nothing major, but enough to feel proud of. I adopted a second dog, a rescue named Maple, who Biscuit adores. And last month, I finally took that trip to Italy that Tommy and I always talked about. I went to Florence and stood in front of Michelangelo's David, and I cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of being alive. I ate pasta at a tiny restaurant where the owner sang opera between courses. I watched the sunset from a rooftop terrace, a glass of wine in my hand, Tommy's grandmother's ring catching the fading light. And I laughed. God, I laughed so much. Gerald and Maureen haven't contacted me since that day in my living room. I heard through a mutual friend that they've been telling people I stole their son's inheritance, but no one who knew Tommy believes them. His firefighter brothers especially. They send me Christmas cards every year and invite me to every memorial event. They know who I am. They know who Tommy was. Sometimes, late at night, I still talk to him. I tell him about my day, about the funny thing Biscuit did, about the painting I'm working on. I tell him I miss him, because I do, every single day. I tell him I'm trying to live the way he asked. And sometimes, I swear I can hear his voice in the quiet. That's my girl, Caro. That's my girl. Last week, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from Maureen. Her voice was different, smaller, somehow. Tired. Caroline, she said, I know I don't deserve your time, but I was wondering if you might be willing to meet me for coffee. Just the two of us. I was silent for a long moment.
Why?
I finally asked.
She paused.
Because I've been reading Thomas's letter. The copy you left with our lawyer. I've read it probably 100 times. Her voice cracked. And I think I finally understand what I lost. Not just my son, but any chance of knowing the woman he loved. I thought about hanging up. I thought about all the years of cruelty, all the cold silences, all the ways she had made me feel worthless. But then I thought about Tommy, about his big, generous heart, about how he always believed people could change, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. Okay, I said. One coffee.
But Maureen?
This is your only chance. We met at a cafe downtown last Tuesday. Maureen looked older than I remembered, grayer, more fragile. She ordered tea and didn't touch it. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. Not just for the last 18 months.
For all of it.
For every time I made you feel like you weren't good enough. For every time I dismissed your work, your life, your love for my son. She looked down at her hands. Thomas was right. I was so focused on who I wanted him to be that I never saw who he actually was. And I was so jealous of your relationship, of how happy you made him, that I convinced myself you must be manipulating him somehow. I wasn't, I said. I know. She finally looked up at me, her eyes wet. I know that now. He loved you, Caroline. Really loved you. And instead of being grateful that my son found that kind of happiness, I resented it. A tear slid down her cheek. I'm so ashamed. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just watched her, this woman who had caused me so much pain, sitting across from me in a coffee shop, finally telling the truth. Maureen, I said slowly, I can't promise we'll ever be close.
Too much has happened for that.
But I can promise you this. I will never keep you from Tommy's memory. If you want to see photos, hear stories, visit his grave together, I'm open to that. He would have wanted us to try. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. It's what Tommy would have wanted, I said simply. And honoring him is how I'm choosing to live now. We finished our drinks in relative silence. When we stood to leave, Maureen did something she had never done in 12 years of knowing me. She hugged me. It was awkward and stiff and lasted only a few seconds. But it was real. "Thank you, Caroline," she whispered, "for loving him so well." I walked home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. The sun was warm on my face. Cherry blossoms were blooming along Main Street. Biscuit and Maple greeted me at the door with wagging tails and sloppy kisses. I went to the living room and looked at Tommy's portrait, the one I'd painted, the one his mother had tried to take. His smiling face looked back at me, frozen in time, but somehow still alive. "I think she's finally getting it, Tommy," I said softly. "It took a while, but she's getting there." I could almost hear his voice. "See, Caro? Told you people can change." That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and watched the stars come out. Tommy's letter was in my pocket, where I keep it always. I've read it so many times the paper is starting to wear thin at the creases. But I don't need to read it anymore. I know every word by heart.
Live.
"Don't you dare spend the rest of your life in black, mourning me like some Victorian ghost." And I haven't. I've worn yellow and red and bright, blazing orange. I've laughed until my stomach hurt. I've danced alone in the kitchen to terrible 80s music. I've painted dozens of pictures, some of Tommy, some of flowers, some of nothing at all except the colors I feel inside. I've lived. Not because I've forgotten him, but because remembering him means remembering how he made me feel, seen, loved, and completely alive. That's his legacy. That's what he left me. Not money. Not a house. Not legal documents. Permission. Permission to be happy, even after loss. Permission to love again, when and if I'm ready. Permission to wake up every morning and choose joy, even when grief is still a passenger in my heart. If you're watching this and you've lost someone you love, a spouse, a parent, a friend, please hear me. Grief and joy can coexist. Moving forward is not the same as moving on. And anyone who tells you how to mourn, how long to mourn, what to wear while you mourn, they don't get to decide. You do.
Tommy taught me that.
And now I'm teaching it to you. My name is Caroline Bennett. 18 months ago, I buried the love of my life. His mother told me I was a disgrace because I dared to smile. But I found a letter in an old jacket pocket.
And it changed everything.
If you enjoyed my story, don't forget to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this message of hope can travel. And remember, the people we love never truly leave us. They live on in the choices we make, the joy we create, and the courage we find to keep going. Tommy's dying wish was for me to live. And that's exactly what I'm doing.
For him. For me.
For every widow who's ever been told that laughter is betrayal. It's not betrayal. It's love. It's the deepest love of all.